Right, well, it is now a minute and a bit past 10. Um, I'm going to welcome people to this seminar, which is about building resilient island communities. But before I say a few introductory words, I'll perhaps just hand over to Maddie to explain the logistics of the meeting and just how we're set up for the session. So would you like to just say a few introductory words about that side of things, Maddie?
Yeah, definitely. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. This session is recorded. The recording will be made available to everyone afterwards. We've disabled webcams and microphones for now. However, you're most welcome to put in a chat message, and towards the end we can unmute people and use their cameras as well. This is just to avoid some embarrassing things being said in camera when people are unaware that their cam's still on or their microphone's still on. We have quite an engaging session on today, and I hope you'll enjoy it. If you do have any questions, then you will all have received emails from me, so please do feel free to reply to any of these.
Thanks very much, Maddie. So if I could just issue a very warm welcome to everybody who's joined us, and I think one or two additional people may pop into the meeting as we go along. It's normally the case that when you start these things, by a strange happenstance, additional people pop out of the ether in this virtual world we now live in. And I think this concept of a virtual world is very empowering for island communities, particularly because since the pandemic, the really wide adoption of things like Teams and Zoom has probably enhanced the connectivity and interaction agenda that island communities have been grappling with really since the dawn of time. Having said that, there is no substitute for being in a place and talking to people face to face. So I'm hoping that a number of positive interactions and connections will spin off this event that will involve some of those sort of discussions and engagements. The background to having you all here today and being very excited about the opportunity to talk about building resilient island communities is my interest, along with colleagues, in social value. So I developed something called the Social Value Engine, which is a piece of software for assessing the social impact of how people do things a decade ago, and have worked in a whole range of different communities using that tool, and done some work historically linked to island communities in places like Rathlin Island in Northern Ireland, but 3 years ago, we negotiated a contract with the Scottish Government to use the tool to evaluate the impact of community-led local development across rural and coastal communities in Scotland. And it was really through working in detail in Orkney that I realised just what a potent agenda social value was in island communities, because of the different contexts within which they operate, really linked to the unique circumstances that every island faces. Because whilst they are all islands, each one is of a different size and scale, and even climate and series of connectivities. So there's a real diversity. But I suppose if you were trying to find one thing that was underpinning in relation to them, is that they do have a different sense of closeness and togetherness for the people who live there, simply because of the way that they're actually configured. And I think there's a huge amount of learning that can be shared around good practice between islands in the context of social value, but also, a significant body of practice that can be relevant more widely, which started to emerge through the lens of the work I was doing with the Social Value Engine, myself and my team. And I identified some really interesting people that I thought would form the heart of a really useful knowledge exchange. And I've lent on one or two of them to be here today, and they're the people that make up the agenda. I'm really thrilled to have Anna Whelan, who's now actually working partially with my business Rosary Generation, who's able to talk to us today. Maddie, who just explained to you that we've turned your cameras off, not because we want to really not look at you, but just because of all the logistical issues that we need to manage, who leads our work around key aspects of the social value engine. And then Luke, who's going to talk to us particularly around North Ronaldsay and some of the unique issues in a very small island community there. And then Foch, who actually, because Ireland's a very international place, even though he's actually based in North Harris, originates from Brittany, but I won't steal his thunder either. And then we wanted to talk about, towards the end of the little vignettes that we're going to present to you, some examples of ways that you could both use the social value engine or other approaches to social value, because we're not just promoting our own particular approach, and also the way that people like Luke and Anna and myself might be able to support things that you might want to do around this whole agenda. So that's really the background to where we are and what we're about. We're going to run the whole thing over an hour, so we're not intending to eat up too much of your time. Because these things always overflow, we've allowed an hour and a half. And in my experience, people are always pleased when you give them 10 minutes back at the end of something for a cup of coffee. But if you are fully engaged and enthusiastic, then we'll run for the whole duration. So that's the background to our starting point in the context of what we're going to do. I think Maddie is keeping an eye on the chat. And we have got an interactive question and answer session scheduled for the end of the presentations. And again, Maddie will explain how that's going to operate. So I think without further ado, and assuming that Maddie's in the control room and enabling everything, I'm going to hand over to Anna to take us through our first presentation. So over to you, Anna.
Thank you very much, Ivan. I'll just get this one up on Teams. Right, I'd like to offer some reflections on islands in general. And those of you who live on islands, this will all seem very familiar, but for those who don't, it might offer a new perspective on a few things. Can someone just tell me if you can see that coming up now on the screen? And we'll carry on. Are we good?
Yes, that works.
Excellent, lovely. Okay. Well, this was a perspective some of you might not have seen before. This is the view you might get if you're an Arctic tern swinging in from the north. As you can see, you've got Orkney and Shetland over on the left there, the Outer Hebrides over on the right. If you're in Orkney, everything south of the Pentland Firth is just known as South. And as you can see from here, it all looks quite a long way away, and quite a lot of it is off the map altogether. But your perspective is also going to depend to some extent on what century you're in as well. Just try to move on here. If you're in the 10th century, when the Viking expansion was well underway, they started arriving in Orkney from the late 8th century, and they liked the place so much they stuck around for about 500 years. You can see there that the islands were very central to the Viking Empire. You've got the red bit there in Scandinavia is the homeland. The orange parts are the lands that the Vikings conquered and ruled over for hundreds of years. And then the yellow parts are the sort of trading and raiding areas. And it wasn't until 1472 that the earldom of Orkney was absorbed into the Kingdom of Scotland. And we've been part of Scotland ever since, but we like to keep our options open on that matter. Now, about that same time, Caxton brought the printing press over to Britain. And ever since then, we've had a problem with the islands, which is, as you can see in this map, this one dates from 1744. And anyone here from Shetland will have immediately noticed that Shetland is in a box. This is a very familiar phenomenon. And it's not always in the same place, because here you'll see it's drifted west and it's gone to join the Outer Hebrides. Whereas in this next map, which is a map of regional health boards from 2016, you'll see that both Orkney and Shetland have drifted over to the south, and they're somewhere east of Peterhead. However, after 2018, you will have noticed a change in any maps published in Scotland by public bodies. And the reason for that was the Shetland mapping requirement, which into the Islands Scotland Act. Now, this was slipped in under the radar by Tavish Scott, who was the MSP in Shetland at the time. On the final reading of the Act, he said nobody puts Shetland in a box, and he was going to make absolutely sure of that. And so he brought in the Shetland mapping requirement, and what that says is that in any map of Scotland, the Shetland Islands must be displayed in a manner that accurately and proportionately represents their geographical location in relation to the rest of Scotland. And you see here it's worked exactly as intended, because we've got the same map of Scottish health boards, this time from 2019, and this time we've got Shetland and Orkney firmly anchored in the correct location. Now, obviously, the media had a lot of fun at the time with the Shetland mapping requirement, but the serious purpose of that legislation is the need for policymakers to be fully conscious of the actual location of Shetland and the rest of the islands, and the implications of location for islanders in general in any consideration of national or international policy, because peripherality is an issue. And that goes for all islands, not just Shetland. So here's an example. I want to give you a few examples now of why it does matter where the islands are. This is an example from the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. Now, for anyone here from England, it's very similar to the Index of Multiple Deprivation.
You've got a little egg timer whizzing round, Anna, at the moment. I don't know if you want to just try and...
I can't see an egg timer here.
We'd got the Shetland map, but
yeah.
I think you've that's. I wonder if it's worth me sharing, if I can just find the maps, because it seems to be
right. I wonder if that might be. Yeah. Is that everybody's got? No, other people say they're not seeing a timer.
Yeah. Right. So we're back to your first slide now. So do you want to just motor through and see if you can get to the relevant one?
I can't control it now. I think you're controlling it, aren't you?
No,
that's right.
No, I've not.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, we're seeing your.
Okay, everyone's got that. Good. Scottish Index Multiple Deprivation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You're
right.
back.
I'll try and read off the paper now, then, because I can't see the notes. Okay.
Sorry, Ivan. That's me. I just jumped in.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Should we carry on?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, right. This right here we have one of our data zones. This is an Orkney data zone, and as you can see, because our data zones have to be between 500 and 1,000 people, we sometimes have to have more than one island in a data zone. Familiar to anyone with islands. This particular one is Stronsay, Sandy, and North Ronaldsay, and no, we want to stay on that one. That's right. And in terms of geographical access to services, which is one of the domains in the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, this particular data zone scores 77 out of 6,976. So it is quite deprived, but we were a bit surprised it did come out even higher. So I had a look into the methodology for this data zone, for this particular indicator, drive time methodology, which makes up a major part of geographical access to services. To see how ferries were handled, because of course if you're sitting on North Ronaldsay and you want to access, say, a commercial centre, which is one of the indicators, you've got to get on a ferry. Now the methodology is set out there, where drive times include a ferry journey, the calculation is schedule based. Times are averaged to take account of the timetable data, and it includes 30 minutes wait time at the ferry. Right. So if we carry on, see the next slide shows the calculation. Is someone controlling those? Because I can't do it from here now.
Yeah, Maddie will put up the next slide there.
Okay, there we are. That's just to show that really whoever devised this calculation really was trying to do it properly. You can see you've got that 30-minute wait time in there highlighted in yellow, everything else beautifully laid out. If we move on though and have a look at how it works in practice, our next slide shows you the ferry timetable for North Romilsey. And you can see that if you're wanting to go shopping, you get on your ferry. Sorry, I'm struggling to read this now because I haven't got my notes up there, but you can get on, you drive from your home to the North Romilsey ferry turntable, ferry terminal, you wait your 30 minutes, you sit on your ferry for I think it's 2 hours 40 minutes, and you get to Kirkwall and drive to Tesco, and there you are. It's about 3 hours 40 minutes, I think, from recollection. But the problem comes when you've done your shopping and you want to turn around and go home, because if you've come in on a Tuesday, your next boat out is on Saturday morning at 8 o'clock from Kirkwall. So that's a 4-day shopping trip. And it's not much better if you come in on a Saturday because you can't get home till the following Tuesday. And that's in the summer. If we look at the winter timetable, the next one, you'll see that all it says about North Romilsey is a weekly service will be carried out to North Romilsey, weather permitting. So that's it, and as Luke will tell you when he comes on, it can be 3 weeks before weather permits. So if we move on now, I've got a couple of examples, very quick ones, of, no, we don't want that one, Maddie, I think you're looking at the wrong one there. No, we should have something, there we are, Emergency Control Centres in Scotland, 2013 and 2015. This is what happened when the 8 Scottish police forces were amalgamated into one, into Police Scotland. There were 8 emergency control centres in Scotland at the time. You can see them there on the map. But the decision was made to close 5 of these, with the result that now we only have 3 left. The islands put up a fight at the time, because you can see the one in Dundee now, which is the furthest north there, that's covering an area half the length of the British Isles. It's a massive area, and it means that the people in that centre have got to learn the whole of that geography, because there are quite a number of place names on the islands which are the same on different islands, which could be hundreds of miles apart, so it is quite a major issue. Now, if we move forward and look at the next one, you'll see it's very similar. It's Highlands and Islands Airports Limited, air traffic control towers. In 2019, the decision was made by HIAL in 2019. They were going to close these 5 air traffic control towers and move to remote surveillance based in Inverness. But a big protest was put up, and again, and this time it worked, because you'll see in 2024 we've still got all of those air traffic control towers there. And the reason for that is because the Islands Scotland Act introduced a duty on island authorities. We could move on to the next one. There we are. There's a duty now on relevant authorities in Scotland to have regard to island communities in carrying out their functions. And that duty has to be carried out by means of conducting island communities impact assessments on any policy, strategy or service which, in that authority's opinion, is likely to have an effect on the island community which is significantly different from its effect on other communities, including other island communities. So you have to look at each island separately in the area in which that authority exercises its functions. And you can see over there on the right the list of relevant authorities to which that applies. It includes Scottish ministers, all the major public bodies, and the 6 islands councils. That's the wholly island councils and the ones that just have islands. So those are in a unique situation. They don't just have to have island community impact assessment done to them, but they actually have to do it as well themselves with regard to their own islands. But as we saw, it worked. And what actually happened was, if we move on to the next one, there we are. This is what happened. The plan was announced, but because we had in the meantime, had the islands stopped that coming in, there were some protests about this to HIEL, and they therefore decided to commission an island community impact assessment of all the islands affected. Now, in fact, the legislation didn't kick in that particular bit till December, but because it's retrospective, it means that if you feel that a policy, strategy, or service hasn't taken island community impact island communities into account properly, you can, if you're an island, request that that body goes back and does it retrospectively, and so that's what they did. And the ICIA report they commissioned, it did indeed find significant adverse impacts on the economies, the resilience, and the future development potential of those islands concerned. And the economy was because this plan was going to take quite a lot of very high-paid jobs out of the islands, which might not have made a big difference to somewhere on the mainland, but on an island it makes a big difference. The resilience point was because islands are uniquely dependent on air transport, and therefore if there's any interruption to the service, as could happen if it's all dependent on remote control, as we know that that's dependent on data connectivity, which is unreliable in itself. That is going to impact on the resilience of those islands. And the future development potential was affected because if you do have remote surveillance around an airport, you need a huge open space around it, and that's going to impact on what you can do in that space. So as a result of that ICIA, HIEL agreed to a revised air traffic management scheme, which did start to introduce remote surveillance, but it retains air traffic control tower services at all those 5 airports. So that's an example of a piece of legislation doing what it was supposed to do, and working very nicely. Now, if we have a look at the next one, this is showing that there's a lot of big changes coming up. These are big issues. These are impacting on all of us, not just those of us on islands, but the point is they're going to impact differently on the islands and differently on each island, and we need to use every tool at our disposal to help to explain to decision makers what's happening. And so there's some of the tools we're using at the moment. There's ICIA we talked about. This community wealth building is really taking off now, and that works really well on islands. It's about trying to keep that wealth within the community. And the National Islands Plan 2 is coming up just down the road. That's a rewrite. It was consulted on earlier in the year. And the decision's been made to rewrite the National Islands Plan, so it's very exciting to see what's coming up there. So that, I think, is the point at which I'll wind up and pass over to Maddie now, who's going to explain a little more about how we actually are going to measure things like social value and the impact on islands of everything that's going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna. Some really interesting initial warming us up perspectives there, and I noticed that while you were doing that presentation, that Margaret, who's involved with the James Hutton Institute, has just put in the chat that the new Island Survey report, the second one, has just been published today. So I don't know if we just pure good luck, but and she's very helpfully put the link to that report there. So I would urge people perhaps to have a look at that, not while we're talking, because obviously we've got exciting things to say, but post the event. I think there's some useful information and links there. And to me, what your introductory session reveals is just the real importance of understanding that different context that fits around islands, and not trying to shoehorn places that are very distinctive with distinctive challenges into national policy without thinking carefully about it. And social value engine is all about nuance. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Maddie now, who, as you said, will take us through and give us some examples of how it works. So over to you, Maddie.
Yes, all right. Thank you, Anna and Ivan. And I'm just going to say a few words on the concept of social value and the tool we produced, Social Value Engine. It's a very short demonstration as well of the tool in practice. So when we talk about social value, we are really calculating the change in well-being of a population. And it's putting numbers on these that are not money, but they are actually the very fabric of society. they are the reason we have local authorities, public sector, third sector, and private sector working towards an improvement in the well-being of society and to create happier communities. So at the social value engine, and I'm sure by now you have an inkling of the tool, and I will show it a little bit, but just to provide a little bit of background next to this very charming team photo we took very recently. So this is a platform that, unlike others, it has actually been designed and created by both a consultancy as well as a council, which is East Riding of Yorkshire. And I was very happy to visit there last week for the first time, and it's quite an area of high contrast, if you like. So through the social value engine, we can make the process of doing these social value assessments a little bit easier, but also more accurate and more transparent, because we use proxies, which is a very, very tricky word to just say, the approximations of value. How do we calculate these values? Using verified sources, using academic sources or government sources, and our team makes sure that these are all kept up to date. And as such, we are the one platform in the UK that is accredited by Social Value International. And really, we are on a bit of a mission to doing social value the right way, which basically means we don't want it to be a tick box exercise. We want this to be the driver of the way we do business, the way we start projects, our strategies, our policies, and anything we do across communities. And I'll show these, but these are not our own. These are the Social Value International principles. And I won't go through a lengthy explainer for each of these, but what it really means is that when we do anything in a community, we make it stakeholder driven. We make it the people that say what matters to them. It should be the people, the communities, who state if something has been successful in impacting well-being negatively or positively, and to measure what matters, to value the things that matter to people, and the things we can track, because it can become, we may want to track everything, but sometimes we can't do that. But there's this saying that enough precision for the decision. It's to have an understanding of the impact that our work is making in communities and society. I'm going to do a very quick switch over to show you a very new version of the social value engine, and this is actually quite special. So this is the first time that we are doing a little preview of the social value engine. So our team has been working very hard on a new version, and I will show you this, which might seem a little bit overwhelming or not, depending on your level of experience in social value. But basically what we're trying to calculate is a social return on investment, which is basically saying for every pound we spend on a project, what does it actually result, not so much in monetary terms, but in the change in well-being? What's the value to the stakeholders, the people who are impacted? I've set up a project here called Rural Connection Social Prescribing Platform. What if in the island community we have a project that does social prescribing? What is the impact on society and people's well-being? I will quickly talk you through at any time. If anyone is interested in getting a proper demo, please do reach out. I'd be happy to do that. For the sake of the webinar and people's time, I will show you a little bit in how we calculate these. This project was only for a year, so that's the time frame we're monitoring. Potentially, in longer term strategies, you do this to 2 or 3 years, understanding there's going to be a slight drop off. The impact of a project is not always the same over these years. For this project in particular, we've identified 2 main stakeholders: local health board and obviously the people who are getting social prescribing referrals. we've identified outcomes. So outcomes are a change in state and well-being, if you like. It's for these we've said it's more feeling more positive about the future, feeling less stressed, and feeling less isolated. And isolation in island communities, although there's a very strong sense of community, isolation and feeling remote, especially if family lives somewhere else, it can be a real issue. That's maybe not recognized as much on maybe like an urban level or a more central level. We will then assign proxies. Again, these are these values that we can put on these using this academic research. And in the social value engine, we then link to the source of the research. So it's not just us putting a number out of the air, tick box exercise. We think that's worth £5,000. It's actually based on research. And again, I will show you a little bit about how this is actually then, how did we get to this? How did we get to this beautiful report? It's for filling out, and these need a bit of thought. These are not just something you do in 5 minutes. It's about working with these stakeholders and identifying what outcomes matter, what approximations value matter, and what are the inputs for this. So generally, within the social value engine, we will have a way to
Have we lost Maddie right mid-presentation there? Yeah, one or two people are nodding. So while we were just waiting for her to come back, this page is basically showing you how you take each of the things, each of the outcomes that you've identified, and you actually choose from a menu the most appropriate financial proxy. Once you've chosen that financial proxy, you can then basically use that to ascribe a value to the outcome. And this page is just a summary page, but when you methodologically work through those outcomes, you get to a position where you might have 6 or 8 of them, and then that feeds into that update page that Maddie was showing. Perhaps if we go back to the report page, Maddie, because I think you can hear me even though you can't.
I can, yes. I am gonna have to be invisible because all my USB devices just stopped working. So what everyone's not seeing is me scrambling behind my desk, trying to, plug in USB cables again. I'm working on a webcam, but here we have a report.
But that's the report. I think rather than try to spend too much time sort of doing this as a duo, what we'll do is, and we'll share the link for the social value engine with people after the event, is we'll just send you all an example of a report based on this work that Maddie's done. But basically, I think we ought to probably hand over to our next speaker, Luke, because he's going to be able to talk to us about how he's used the social value engine, in inverted commas, in anger in North Ronaldsay. And what we'll then do is move on to Foch. He'll talk to us about an example of what it's like to deliver a service that might be pertinent for the assessment of social value, the Ranger service in North Harris. And then we'll go back to Luke and talk about some of the practical challenges in using social value to assess social impact, particularly in island places, which are atypical, as we've said. So I'm sorry to cut you off mid-discussion, Maddie, but bearing in mind some of the challenges of the technology, if everybody's happy, we'll hand over to Luke.
Absolutely, yes, and apologies for that.
Perfect, thank you very much. Hopefully the technology will play ball with me a little bit better. All right, so hopefully that's come through. Right, so yeah, good morning. My name's Luke Fraser. I work for the North Ronaldsay Trust. I'm the Community Development Manager on the, working for the island, and we're looking at all the capital projects and the various other projects that are developed. I also work as a senior consultant at Aquaterra, and run my own little consultancy as well, working with development trusts and other community organisations on housing projects and other community development projects. And that was the kind of reason we really got into Social Value Engine, was to try and work at this micro scale to see how we can show the value that a lot of these projects bring. Because some of the projects, it's difficult to argue them from a value for money scale, just because of the numbers of people we're talking about and the value, the money that's required to develop some of these projects. It's quite difficult to argue them at that scale, but at a social value scale, it's so much easier. The impact is so much larger. So just looking at here, measuring social value at this micro scale, just looking here at North Ronaldsay. So this gives you an idea of the micro scale. This is North Ronaldsay. It's about 4 miles long, 2 miles is widest. It's got 65 people on it. So it is a very, very small island community. And we'll see some of the projects we're looking at with other communities, islands of 300, 500, 1,200, all the way through to the larger mainland of Orkney, which is about 17, 18, 19,000, and same with Shetland and Lewis and Harris. So the ability for using Social Value Engine in our projects, it crosses all of those island sizes and scales. But in a minute, we're just going to look at some of the issues around the micro. And the first thing is, with North Ronaldsay, is the impact of individual small development, small projects can have a huge impact. So this former schoolhouse was redeveloped in 2019. That's one house for one family, but the impact that one house for one family has on an island of 65 people is huge, because this house has enabled us to keep the school open. It's enabled us to keep some people with high skills on the island. It's enabled us to draw more families into the island. So that one property, if you put that one property in Orkney's main town of Kirkwall, brilliant, you've got an extra house, but it doesn't have the same impact. Even some of our smaller commuter villages on mainland Orkney, you put one house there, it's a bonus, it's a benefit. We all know about the housing crisis. Every property matters, but it doesn't have the same impact as it does in the smaller islands that we're looking at here. So housing, these small projects are key. The added social value on these is significant, but the ability to measure that is actually really quite difficult. Because how do you measure in social value terms the fact that this one house has helped you keep the school open? It's not an easy thing to look at. Next, let's look at transport. As Anna's already mentioned, getting a ferry to North Ronaldsay is not an easy thing to do. It can take a while. It can be quite rough. So the main link is an air link. So in summer, the island gets three trips a day. In winter, it gets 2. And public sector bodies, councils have got significant pressure now on budgets. So you've got it's really difficult, as I've mentioned already. Some of these islands are very, very small populations, but in terms of the cost of providing services, it can be very, very high. But we are talking about a 3rd aircraft for the North Isles, just because of the benefit and the advantage that would bring. But again, there's a significant financial cost alongside that, and it would need to be subsidised. But the ability to look at the potential social value for adding that additional aircraft, or in the reverse, the thing we don't want to look at really is the potential for losing some of those services and the impact there would be on the social value and the well-being of that place if services were reduced. Again, Social Value Engine and other tools are a really good way of assessing that give us something that's just beyond those pounds and pence, gives us that well-being indicator. Next thing we're looking at is things like tourism, business here. This North Ronaldsay is a Dark Skies island. And we also have a bird observatory there in the bottom right. That bird observatory is the island's pub. It's the island's main shop. It's the island's main accommodation for visitors. It brings in volunteers. It brings in a lot of spend on the island, and the benefit of that business and other businesses in other areas, work with lots of other communities that have key cornerstone businesses, be it fishing, be it fish farming and other areas as well. There's massive cornerstone businesses that bring huge economic value, but also bring a real social value as well. And it's how you measure that is something we're also looking at. Heritage, and Fons will come and talk about this a bit more in a minute. This is the Old Beacon, it's the 2nd oldest lighthouse in Scotland. North Ronaldsay has a real heritage in terms of buildings, in terms of language. Got a 13-mile long stone dike that goes all the way around the island. It's a Grade A listed monument. So there's various buildings here that have huge impact on the heritage of the island, huge social value around what the island is and who islanders are, and it's the measuring of this in terms of retaining it and working through as well. And finally, North Ronaldsay sheep. One of the only 2 mammals that subsist on seaweed. This and a Galapagos iguana, I think, is the other one. We don't have any of those yet. I'm working on it, but we don't have any of those yet. But this, again, there's the social value around things like this, and we'll come to the main project I've just been looking at using social value engine on in a minute. But the sheep are a key part of that because they're part of the island's heritage. It's a unique sheep breed going back thousands of years. And it's a massive tool there. They're a massive tool for the island in terms of our in terms of the identity of the island, but also then potential in terms of economic benefit as well. So that gives you a little bit of a taste of some of that micro level and some of the different things that we're looking at, how that would need social value assessing on, but it's quite difficult to do at this scale compared to some other areas. This is the big project that we kind of did this initial social value assessment on. It's called TREAD. It's a £2 million community hub project, and it's £2 million of public funding for an island of 65 people. It was a real coup to get the funding for this, and part of the reason we managed to pull together funding was because of the different things that were offered on the site. We've got a 2-bedroom flat, again brings in that housing element to try and retain more people. Also kind of gym and a wellbeing centre, developing that at the moment, and that's something that the community's wanted for quite some time. But developing a gym on its own is really difficult to get funding, but doing it as part of this larger project certainly helped. Hot desking and meeting room spaces, as Ivan's mentioned already, that ability to do things digitally has certainly helped in terms of small island communities. You can now, where a small island used to provide a house and at least one job, probably 2 or 3 sometimes, to attract a new islander or a new family onto the island. If you can now provide a house with a good internet connection, households who often want that lifestyle change can bring a role with them, and that's completely game-changing for island communities as well, particularly smaller ones. So we've got some hot desking space there to try and facilitate some of that. A new build wool mill and a new build meat larder. So it's a 30-metre shed by 12 for a wool mill, so brand new purpose-built wool mill. We have one on island already. It's just not really fit for purpose. It was built in the early 90s. It doesn't meet the new standards. And also a meat larder inside it, a 30 by 12 shed, which is also going to house our community transport garage. Just an area we're just kind of stepping into at the moment. But those are things that are projects very much designed to help sustain the community, to help enhance resilience, and that's how measuring the social value on those is a key thing. And finally, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service are going to use that garage as their new fire station and garage, and that's some real good partnership work in there. And having that project together, all those elements together, really was something the funders caught interest in. So we've got UK Government Community Ownership Fund funding from Rural Islands Housing Fund with the Scottish Government, from the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund, Island Communities Fund, Scottish Land Fund, Sports Scotland, Highlands Islands Enterprise, a number of Orkney Islands Council funds as well. But this was all pre the current pressure there is on public funding. So this sort of project now will be really, really difficult to fund on a value for money basis. And that's where your social value element comes in. That's where you can say, well, yes, it's going to cost you, instead of £200,000 to build a house, the same house is going to cost you £350,000 to build on one of our islands. But the impact of that house being built is going to be significant and beyond what it would be on a mainland area, just to kind of show some of that real benefit that's there. So just kind of going through some of this is just finishing off for me, just some of the using social value engine, trying to calculate social value on this island and micro scale. It's becoming even more important for these projects where value for money assessment is going to be hang on how much. It's really difficult to make the case in some of these, and social value is a really good opportunity to potentially make sure we don't miss some of those real benefits of the project that would come. Oh, sorry, there we go. That would come from that project, and the value for money might miss on its own. Social value engine itself provides that excellent, it's an accredited assessment tool, and it uses proxies, but that accreditation again is relied on those specific proxies. And at a very small community level, it's sometimes hard to find accredited proxies that fit. And that certainly happened on the housing front. Some of the proxies were about things like rough sleeping and various bits and pieces. They were all good. They were all relative and related to housing. But when that property has helped keep a school open, those proxies were good and gave some good numbers, and each of the projects came with a positive social value. But it felt like it potentially also underestimated the potential value that project would bring. And that kind of led to a question: how can the engine and how can we work with the different elements of social value and the things that have been developed through academia, through research at the moment? How can we enhance that to report on social value at a smaller community scale with specific focus on islands. How can we develop and enhance things like social value engine, like Ivan and the team have done in Northern Ireland, in Wales and other areas, for the islands, in Scotland in particular, to get ourselves an enhanced and more realistic and more up to full value in terms of the social value engine of what these projects can bring to us. And that's certainly the kind of question we posed, and that certainly helped develop some of this. So that's me. I'll hand back to Maddie. Thank you.
Well, that's great. Actually, I'll hand over to Maddie in a second. But I think in agenda item 5, we're going to pick up on the answer to your positive challenge, Luke. But yes, I think, Maddie, we're moving over to Fosh now, aren't we, to get him to give a
We are,
perspective?
yes. I was thinking that it's not me, it's on Fosh at the moment, yes.
Hi, all right. So let me just share my screen like everybody else. Perfect. So, yeah, sure. All right, clever. Hello, so I'm Fosh. I'm the ranger for North Harris. So I'll tell you a little bit more about just about the job, about who I work for. So here in the Western Isles, currently 75% of the population lives on community-owned estates, which is exactly what it says in the title. It's the estate itself, instead of being owned by a private landlord, is owned by the people who actually live in the area. And usually it is done through a trust, like the North Harris Trust, the people I work for. And that has loads of advantages. Obviously, if you want to develop facilities, if you want to create things locally, Luke was mentioning many projects. These kind of projects can be done with a lord, but they're way easier to do if the people involved are just the local people and they own the land and they own the assets that allow them to develop these things. Now, in North Harris, our estate has something a bit special that the other estates in the Western Isles don't have, the other community estates in the Western Isles don't have, which is what we call in Gaelic the free. In English, it's known as the deer forest. Don't expect to see too many trees there, but it's essentially what you would call, I guess, in English, it's a wilderness, an open area. It's not the kind of terms people would use in Gaelic, but it's essentially an area that's not agricultural, that's not lived in, that's not occupied, and that is open for the deer to live in. No roads, no villages, no anything. Communities tend not to buy that because they don't see direct value. That's a word we're using a lot today. They don't see direct value in it. What's the value of owning a bunch of rocks for miles and miles and miles on end? But in North Harris, the people have decided to buy it when they bought the estate. And it is a source of income, like actual monetary value, but it's also valuable for many other things. And that's why we are the only community estate here to have a ranger as well, so myself, because we actually need to manage things that go beyond crofting, beyond agricultural and settlement use as it is. So that's a bit of the background. The main focus I'd like to bring on today, because my job is quite diverse and what we do at the North Harris Trust is very diverse, but in terms of talking about social value, but things you can't value with money, or not easily at least, I'd like to talk a bit about intangible cultural heritage, as people say, because my job is paid by Nature Scott, because I'm a ranger, I manage ecological aspects and the environment, but it's also paid in half by Bóis na Gaelic, which is a Gaelic language board, so that I provide a Gaelic language service. But also I do a lot of work with what in English would be called heritage, but in Gaelic we don't really have a word for heritage, because heritage is seen as something that's dead. Heritage is, maybe a sickle that your great-grandfather used in the field and now is in a museum. Heritage is an old lighthouse like we have in Ellan Glass here. It's things that aren't really alive anymore. They're there for you to remember the past. But in Gaelic, we'd use other words. One of the words that I'd like to talk about for today is dúchas. Now, that's a word that's got a lot of attention in the Western Isles these days. essentially what it means is the bond between a community and its environment. So it can mean culture. In Gaelic, we have two different words for culture. And what dúchas means is culture as it relates to the world around you. So peat cutting is part of dúchas, for instance, or fishing is part of dúchas, crafting is part of dúchas, but also place names and eagles and deer. And so there are loads of things English would consider to be part of nature and things that English would consider to be part of culture. And in Gaelic, these two are not split. They are part of dúchas. They all belong together. And in many ways in the Reminder Service, but also North Harris Trust in general, dúchas is a guiding concept to try to think of the estate through the lens of this constant connection between the community and the environment. And it's guiding a lot of decisions being made, and it's certainly guiding my own work in approaching the environment as a community asset and as a community, as something that belongs to the community and is not split from the people who live on this land. This is in line with something many people are hopefully more aware of, which is a recent awareness of indigenous knowledge and indigenous approaches to land management. So especially with climate change and discussions around it around the world, people have realized that actually there are loads of population groups around the world that have not messed up the environment. It's not a universal human behavior. And quite often, indigenous peoples, usually it's used as a legal definition internationally, but it's used to mean the people that were there first and that were taking care of the land and living on the land before colonization and before Western expansion, essentially. And it does apply to some people in Europe who have suffered somehow from colonization and their land have suffered from that. So in the Highlands, we have obviously the Battle of Culloden and the following clearances, which were extremely brutal for the Gaels, for the people of the Highlands and beyond, which have changed the relationship to the land and have affected the way the Highlands are treated. So just something to ponder next time you are in the Highlands is that many Gaels I know consider that the Highlands are a post-apocalyptic landscape. And certainly in Harris, you can see that in the deer forest, human buildings, human practices, human agriculture is all over the place. And it's a reminder, and that's part of dúchas. It's part of this consciousness of the fact that you belong to the land and not the other way around, essentially. So it's a bit, there is way more to say about dúchas, but it's a bit of background to understand this aspect of intangible cultural heritage as it is understood by Gaelic speakers, by the Gaels here. To go kind of hone in a wee bit on the Ranger service as a service, as a community service, there are loads of value in it that cannot be measured with money, simply because I don't make that much money. As I said, my role is funded, and there is a bit of money coming in here and there through services offered, but it's not, it's not even half what we would need to pay a full-time salary. But we see other value in it. We see, and that's talk today, I guess, we see social value in its value that goes beyond what can be calculated. And obviously something that ties in very well with what's been said so far. There is importance of just local community-based services, things that locally people can access, having somebody to help them with things, somebody that knows a place, somebody that lives with them, somebody that's actually paid to do that job, not relying on volunteers, which is a very taxing thing to do. There is value in well-managed land and estate, in well-managed community assets. Communities might own together the land, but how do you have 1,000 people manage these assets together? Well, having staff that work for that community is bringing back so much value through just making sure the assets are managed well and having just the time to do so. There is a lot of value, and I think many people are very aware of this now, in maintaining the value of living in a healthy environment. We in the Western Isles were quite lucky to have an environment in which the air is pure, the water is pure, and there is loads of healthy value in that, but it needs to be maintained, it needs to be taken care of. the way people have taken care of that land for the past 9,000 years at least. So there is a lot of value to having people who can look after it, and once again really focus their time on it. So an example of what we're doing is that we are regenerating our native woodland. So if you visit the Western Isles and you hear me talk about native woodland, you might be a bit confused. But we do have native woodland in Western Isles. It's well hidden in the hills. You need to know where to look. And so we're strengthening these pockets of native trees in order to support biodiversity in the face of climate change, in order to strengthen an existing habitat that we already have, but also in order to offer community value. And it's not forestry, we're not going to cut these trees and sell the wood. So it's another example of something that has no monetary value, but we know through the preparation work we've done that it will bring back a lot to people, such as under trees, the grass that grows is way better pasture than heather. And so the crofters, when the trees are mature, will be able to let the cows and the sheep in seasonally to graze on better pasture, which result in better sheep, better cattle, and better value also in the community. So there is an impact on these kind of things that we are very much aware of, even though you can't really monetize it. And there is something very important I was mentioning. I'm paid by Bóithne Gaelic, which is promoting and enacting Gaelic indigenous culture. I mentioned Culloden, I mentioned the clearances, and I think for many people in Scotland and in the UK in general, that's history. You look at the history book and it tells you about the clearances, But for Gaels, for Indigenous people in the Highlands, it is not a note in a history book like the Battle of Stirling Brig or whatever. It is their life. It's their daily life. The impact of the clearances means people live in the house they live in today, live in the village they live in today, farms the land they farm today. And it also means that the traumas transmitted in families, the mental health that people have today is impacted by this. To give you an example of how vivid it is for Gaels, a couple of years back on the 16th of April, anniversary of Culloden battle, I heard 3 Lewis men talk about Culloden as if it had happened just this morning, with the same passion and fire and trauma that if they had themselves been there, because everything that followed that battle has affected them personally, their parents, their grandparents, and everything that makes their life today. So having a job like my job, for instance, that validates Gaelic culture and language, that validates Indigenous knowledge, and that gives a legitimacy to it as something that the community can do and can value and can go forward with, is very important for people's mental health and for healing and helping to heal historical trauma. And this type of validation, this type of legitimacy, and many rural areas in Scotland are suffering from similar types of trauma and similar types of disempowerment. Giving value to these things, to people's culture, people's language, people's way of life and knowledge, is giving them confidence in what they can do, in what they can achieve, and that will give value, that social value we've been talking about, and it's strengthening resilience and empowerment through the culture, through Dúchas, as I was mentioning, through the idea of a relationship of people with each other and with the land around them. So obviously I'm going a bit quickly through these things, but I hope it makes sense, and I think it will echo for many people who are not, we're not Celts, we're not from the Highlands, we're not Gaels. It will echo in their own way within their own community, and I'm sure that in Orkney and Shetland it has its own echo for sure. Obviously, we do have loads of challenges in those areas, and many of them were mentioned already. Transports, very, very concrete, very practical things like ferries, and rurality, which is often left aside by policies. Trauma, I mentioned after ethnocide. For those who don't know, ethnocide means the destruction of people not through killing, but through the systematic destruction of their culture and identity, so that they forget who they are. And I think an important aspect as well that is a challenge and it's very true in islands, is a feeling, the perception of isolation, despite millennia of self-sufficiency. So Anna opened very well with, the history of Orkney and Shetland as being a central place. And at that time, the Western Isles were part of this central place. Nowadays, Tarbert is a very quiet harbour, but there was a time when commercial galleys of Clan MacLeod and of the Kings of Norway and all that were part of our daily life here, and it was a big trading spot. So isolation and the fact of being a periphery is a perception that's created by history and by social and political events. It's not a given, it's not compulsory. So I think giving value also to culture, to heritage, to intangible cultural heritage, giving value to these things, also reminding people that they can be the center of things and that they don't have to struggle with being a periphery. They can thrive with being the center of the world, and that things are set in stone, and we can recreate relationships. And self-sufficiency is an example of something that's being talked about a lot in the Western Isles, how to grow your own food. It was not so long ago that these islands were self-sufficient, so can we do it again? And having access to the land and having access to people who work with the land full-time, like a ranger, for instance, but other people as well, is a good way to bolster that, to strengthen that self-sufficiency and to face the challenges together. And I'm finishing with this, but looking at the future, because I talk about what it is like today, but looking at the future, having this kind of jobs, this kind of services, like a ranger service or anything else that is relevant to the land you live on, is a big step towards the future in, for instance, returning to self-sufficiency, but also in creatively approaching what you can do with your land in a respect to the environment, but also in respect of the community. And especially in the face of climate change and all the things we're all talking about these days, it is more important than ever to go back to this very, very original relationship people have with the world around them. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. That made sense. It's pretty much the end of it for me, but I hope it gave you a kind of an overview of the sort of things we do in this service and the kind of social values that can come of it through culture, through language, through way of life. Yeah, that's Shinakeve. That's it.
That's really thought-provoking, Fosh. Thank you very much indeed for that. And really what you've set there as a challenge is a whole range of things which people might traditionally have described as intangible but very important, which social value can measure. So that whole notion of people's sense of place and the interactions and connections between people that aren't just straightforwardly driven by the market, but which are driven by some of those much deeper, longer term issues and connections, really sit at the heart of what a number of island communities are about, and how we can begin to actually ascribe a value to them in a way which perhaps has been difficult previously. And it builds on what Luke had said earlier about the fact you can sort of straightforwardly talk about the monetary value of investing 2 million and dividing it by 65 people and work out how much is that per head. But that really just seems like a lot of money. It doesn't really explain the underpinning long-term contribution and viability, both personally but also culturally, that sustaining the life of an important island has in the way things operate. I'm going to talk in a little bit about subjective well-being and how we can overcome some of the challenges around trying to take nationally derived financial values and relate them to island places. But before I do that, I don't know, Luke, if there's anything you just want to reflect on before you hand the baton over to me.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, we're going to come into some of the kind of hopefully the resources and various bits and pieces that we can add in here. So I don't think there's much for me to add. I think it's that you've kind of outlined it really well there. This next session is just about, right, how do we potentially in an island way bolt on, add things to and engineer into the social value engine and other ways of doing social value in the island areas and adding that additional value and allowing us to be able to show the projects and the culture and the things that are going on in the islands in a way that is beyond just that financial value, which is so often the kind of way that, you know, we know budget cuts are coming and various things, but we also want to sustain and enhance these communities and these places. And we're in some of the places where it's hardest to prove value for money, but it should be best and easiest to prove that social value as well, and the additional benefit that those investments, those financial investments, are going to make. So now I'll hand over to you to kind of go through some of those kind of ways of working through that.
That's brilliant. Okay, so if I pick up from there, and I can see that Myra from Out Hebrides is on the call. Myra and I have had a dialogue, and I'm still working on this, Myra. It's just, you know, there've been a lot of things as well that I've been juggling, but about the value of being able to speak Gaelic, because there are a whole range of cultural values that really are missed by traditional metrics. But as Foch has said, and as Luke has illustrated, and as Anna has set the context for, these are things which are really important to people's sense of value and well-being in the places they live, and they're not just about the day-to-day transactions now, they're a whole repository of people's sense of place. So as Maddie demonstrated, the social value engine and the whole process of thinking about social value gives you a framework, and that framework is generic, which is why the social value engine is accredited and is able to be accredited, because it follows a series of principles. And the fact that it follows those generic principles is very important, because it gives us a platform, even though I've said context is everything, to be able to communicate some of the unique and distinctive things about our place, but using an approach which means that we can get policymakers and other people to take notice of it. So the bit in the middle that's the real difficulty is that the value of providing a 2-bedroom flat to the sustainability of North Ronaldsay is very different from the traditional social impact that's collected about the benefit of housing. You know, so we've got lots of measures in the social value engine around the benefit of moving to permanent accommodation, the benefit of not being a rough sleeper. Those things might be relevant for the heart of Aberdeen or Glasgow, but you know, they're not as pertinent for the places we're talking about. But there are other things that are equally important. And so, and I hope one or two people might follow up after this meeting with a direct contact. And you can put your details in the chat if you'd like to have more of a dialogue. What we've been talking about doing is using a technique called subjective well-being to actually develop very bespoke proxies based on the life of people living in individual island communities, because there is a robust, from a social science perspective, methodology of working with individuals to actually take their sense of value associated with some of the things that we might corral under the term dúthas that Foch explained to us, and being able to actually use by a benchmarking exercise and with reference to a number of different things like the British Social Attitudes Survey, which has been running since the war and has got lots of really longitudinal data in it, we can derive a value from those subjective discussions about well-being, and by benchmarking that enables us to actually credibly say the value of feeling like you belong in North Harris is X. Now, there is always an element to which this is more of an art than a science. The whole process of social science is predicated on that. But what it really gives us the exciting opportunity to do, using the platform that the social value engine sits on, which is accredited, and using that subjective well-being series of techniques, is to come up with something which is very bespokely rooted in an island or a series of islands, and which then enables, around the policy frameworks that Anna has talked about, and the island survey type work that Margaret's talked about, for us to contextualise some of the real things that underpin the challenges to and the successes around the sustainability of small islands in the context of national policy, and that's really quite important. And so I've recently been doing some work in Orkney looking at the impact of the community development associations. There are a number of these, and I've come up with a series of high-level social values, which are in a range of about, using more standard indicators, more standard financial proxies, which are in a range of about £3.50 per pound invested up to about £7 per pound invested. But I'm itching to get involved in a discussion around some of these subjective well-being measures and begin to derive some direct values associated with them, because they move us onto a new plane where we've got stuff that really gives expression to people living in these localities, but which is actually robust and enables us not to be accused just of anecdote and sentimentalism, but enables us to actually say, this is the social impact we can then demonstrate when we're investing 2 million in what would appear, if you just count the chimney pots, to be a very expensive project, because it's actually about that much broader range of things that underpin really the long-term contribution and the historic value that is vested in places like islands. So that's my next exciting stage of this journey. I hope one or two of you might want to join in. Luke is already signed up to that because I've bullied him, and I think Fosh hopefully will continue his dialogue with us. And Anna's a given because she's partially on the payroll now. But I do hope one or two people who've come to this webinar from other places might be interested, and I'm certainly going to continue the dialogue with Myra about the value of being able to speak and transact things in Gaelic, because I think that really is one very good example of the sort of thing that we can begin to use as a way forward. So I mean, that was everything I'd got from our kind of set presentations. I'm sorry it's been a bit lumpy and bumpy, but people in islands are probably used to the technology not always working perfectly, and it hasn't taken us till Saturday to get here. So you'll be pleased that we've still got a bit of time. So I mean, I think, Maddie, having finished the sort of set piece here, I'm not quite sure how you want to run this last 10 minutes or so, whether people should just put comments in chat and we can pick them up, or whether you can actually turn on people's cameras and we can see the people here. Hopefully none of them have gone to sleep while we've been talking, but yeah, I'll hand over to you, Maddie, just to enable this final bit of the webinar.
It's really about just answering any questions that may have arisen. I can definitely unmute and webcam people. Just put a little message in the chat to do that if required.
Well, if anybody's got any reflections that they'd like to share with us, or if anybody's got any questions they'd like to ask any of our speakers, now is your opportunity. If you're a bit shy and you don't really want to do that now, don't feel obliged to, because we can follow up with you afterwards if you want to drop Maddie or I an email. But if there are any reflections and questions, please feel free in the next few minutes to raise them.
So I don't see anyone
well,
typing.
I mean, I think quite often these sort of set pieces where you've got lots of just little initials on the screen and you can't see people aren't always the most interactive way of getting people to join in. So, I mean, I think if we've got no formal questions or comments from people, we've probably wrapped things up for today. We've got the recording of this, so if any of you would like access to that, we can share that with you, and you can also drop us an email just to pick up on anything that occurs to you after the event. But I think unless anybody's got anything else they want to throw into the mix now, I might just thank the speakers. thank you, Maddie, as well for organising this. Thank the audience for coming. And I hope that we've, in our own sort of homespun and slightly kind of haphazard way in the way the presentations have run technically, piqued your interest and demonstrated, above everything else, our authenticity, because at the heart of social value is this notion of authenticity. And I think really we're on a mission, as we said at the outset, to do that in a way that doesn't overlook places like island communities, which are really, you know, very important, but often seen as peripheral, when actually, as we started with Anna saying, and as Foch has said, you know, actually at one time, perhaps in different economic systems when people had different values, were at the heart of things. So just as I was about to sign off, I see we've got a question. I don't know if that was directed at Foch, but we've got, what do you feel is the common setback that came across when implementing the cultural integration programs? I don't know if there's anything you'd say, Foch, just about your experience of working as a ranger in that cultural context that is useful.
I mean, yeah, a few things that come to mind. You know, it is a good question, because when you're dealing with endangered cultures, you have generations not only of trauma, but you have generations of kind of very, very strongly anchored way of looking at oneself and way to be looked at, and that's what you have to fight. So you'll have people, you know, you'll start doing things in Gaelic, and people will say it's a good thing, but just don't do them because, you know, they remember being beaten at school for it, because they remember being humiliated for decades, and all of a sudden, overnight, it's a good thing. And you're thinking, but it was a bad thing yesterday, so why is it a good thing today? And loads of cognitive dissonance happening here. So that you might have issues there. Another issue that I won't get too much into, because it's quite controversial in this country, I guess. It's how do you deal in beautiful island communities with incomers who are not interested in learning the culture, in learning the language? And some of them, obviously, they don't have to care, but some of them, they want to take part in everything in the community, but they don't want to have to learn the language. So they want everybody else to speak their language. So you end up in situations where you have a room of 20 people having a meeting, 19 of them speak Gaelic, and the 20th, after 30 years of living in the community, can't say good morning in it. So they want the entire meeting to be in Gaelic. So they have to fight against that, because these people feel entitled to force everybody else to use their language instead of integrating to the local community. And that's something you have to fight against, this idea that as an English speaker, for instance, you are entitled to have your way everywhere. And when somebody comes in front of you to say, well, actually, maybe you're not, all of a sudden you're a terrible monster, and it's a difficult thing to do. Even though, you know, in Northern Wales, they do it no problem. So it's not unheard of, but it's a difficult thing to negotiate with people, especially as many people are very nice. They want to take part in the community. They just don't have that mindset that actually language is not just a mode of communication. It matters to the way people do things and the way people connect to each other, the community. So those are two main setbacks I have on a daily basis, honestly. But yeah, things have to be done sometimes, no matter what people feel about it. Hope that answers your question somehow.
I think that's really interesting, Foch, because one of the things that, I mean, a number of our competitors who are commercially into social value aren't interested at all in the issues we're interested in. So they're not interested in island communities. They're not really even interested in North Wales or Northern Ireland. I mean, we've built a huge groundswell of interest and enthusiasm by working in those places. And I have to say at the outset that apart from a bit of very poor schoolboy French, I can only speak English, but we've worked very hard in all the Celtic countries to actually try and make the engine as accessible as possible. So we've recently had the whole thing translated into Welsh, because that's where there's the biggest demand. And that's not to say that because there's less demand, it's not equally important, but we've an agenda around Gaelic and also the Irish language, because in Gaelic, because in elements of our work in Northern Ireland, and interestingly in the Republic now as well. There is a groundswell of interest around being able to access it in that context, and also, you know, some really interesting learning in the Republic about some of the remote working that Luke talked about and the benefits of that. There's a whole Irish government funded program called Grow Remote, which is all about how you really, in a cultural as well as just purely a physical distance context, enable remote communities to build their sustainability, taking advantage of new technology. So I'm just conscious it's 11:21 and I'm probably in danger of pushing us too far into the hour and a half, and people sort of going from being positively engaging to a bit fed up with me. So, but if I can just really thank you very much for that comment, because I think it just raises some things that are at the heart of the way we want to do social value that some of the other players that we work that work in our space don't, and it's nice to have the opportunity to make that clear. Thank you very much indeed to everybody for coming. I'm going to draw a line under things now, because I see there are one or two friends like Ben, who's just having to sign off, who's been able to join us, because it's been a very positive and engaging session, and I'm very grateful to our speakers and to everybody for coming, and hopefully we'll see and maintain a dialogue with some of you going forward. So thank you very much indeed to everyone. I'm going to go now. Bye.